Hi, I'm Jacqueline Peffer, and today we're going to do a bubble technique on a fused glass piece. It's going to be a full tutorial. This will be the actual piece that you create. This just came out of the kiln this morning. I'm actually going through and recording the beginning of the video after I've done the rest of it. So this is the exact piece. You'll note all the way through the video I tell you, oh, you'll see it at the end, you'll see it at the end. I decided we need to start off the video with the exact piece that we're going to make. Now some of you have seen the raven piece before. I had it posted on Facebook. I decided let's try a different one. Let's do a feather this time to complement the raven that was done. So this is the piece that the rest of the video will show you how to create. First thing we need to do is go through what you need for a supply list. This piece created is 6 inches by 8 inches. These are varying lengths and widths. You can cut whatever shape, size you want if you want accent pieces on your completed piece. Now, what we need to do this project, first of all, you'll need your fusible glass cut to the size and shape you want. You will need glass line paint. I use white, Rouchet tracing black best, enamels. They are cadmium free and lead free. They come in powder form. You can buy them in smaller containers than this. I use gum solution in the mixing of the enamels that are put on the stamp and that are painted with a brush to touch up the stamp and the accent areas on the edges of the piece. It will work without the gum solution. The gum solution does help it flow a little bit better. I like it better. It doesn't seem to crack as much with the gum solution mixed in. You will need a little bit of black scrap glass. If you already have coarse and medium black frit, that will work just as well. You can use that. You won't have to make your own frit. But if you don't, I'll show you a very quick way to make frit. And to do that, you will need Grozer pliers. Traditionally, when we use them in this direction. Let's see if I can get this the right way with the camera. With this side up, to when we score our glass and we break it, we use it with this side up. In order to make the frit, and I'm doing this because it didn't come across real clear on the video when I filmed it, this side up. So when you break the glass, you crush it, you use a rocking motion like this, and it'll crumble the glass for you into frit. You're going to need a few paintbrushes, a larger one to get the base coat of glass line on, a couple smaller detail brushes, whatever you have to paint in any detail that's missing on the stamp that we're going to apply. And then I use kind of a medium brush to paint the edges of the glass. It just works out easiest for me, whatever you prefer. Going to need a straw. Regular drinking straw, nothing fancy. Dish soap. I use Dawn Platinum. It's what I have in the house, so it's what I've used in the tutorial. I'm sure any dish soap that you have on hand is going to work just fine. And lastly, if you prefer distilled water to do the mix that we'll be making, tap water, if you haven't had a problem with it with your stained glass in the past, will be just fine. And finally, you're going to need a stamp. This is a 3D printed stamp that my son makes for me. It works quite well. This is the only product that we have available for sale. This will be available on Etsy. I'll provide a link at the bottom or at the end of the tutorial. One word of caution, we only have a limited number of them. Right now as we sit, I think we have 12. It takes a significant amount of time to make them. If there are back orders, if anybody does want them to use them, we will fill the back orders as fast as we can, and you'll be informed for the amount of time that there will be for a wait. Otherwise, any stamp that you have can work. I have used the acrylic stamps. I have used the rubber stamps. They all work fine. They all miss a little bit when they're applied, but they can be used as long as you're willing to paint in a little extra detail to tidy it up when you're done. So with that, we'll get on to creating. I use just a piece of scrap glass, anything you want. I use for a paint palette. So I'm going to use the white glass line paint, and we're going to coat that base glass completely. I always start out with the edges. This will actually play a part later when we finish the piece. Having the edges pre-coated helps the black enamel stick better. We don't have to work so hard at applying the black, and since we're base coating the white on the glass anyway, we might as well just do the edges. Now when you're applying the white to the glass, you need to be careful to get a nice even coat. Glass line is a clay-based paint. Just allow it to float on the glass, get a nice even application, as even as you can. There's always going to be a few brush strokes as we work through it. I just try my best to even it out as much as possible. Even after firing, those brush strokes are going to stay. They may soften up a little bit, but you're going to still see them. They are part of the finished piece if you take it to a contour fuse. It's just one of those things you have to embrace and love. You can minimize them. If you kind of look a little sideways at the piece while you're painting it, you can see the brush strokes and you can see how thick or thin you have them. So if you have a real thick gloppy area, make sure you smooth it out a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing with all three of the accent pieces. I'm going to coat the sides and coat the top of each piece smoothly. Set those off to the side. See, the bigger brush comes in handy. Mom always used to scold me when I was a little girl. I always used a little paintbrush for everything. Actually, sometimes I still do. She'll look at me and say, you just should use a bigger paintbrush. Then you don't have to worry about it. It won't take as much time. Well, Mom was right, as usual. There we go. We've got all three of the small pieces base coated. We've got the larger piece base coated. I'm going to use a hair dryer to speed up the drying process. I won't make you put up with that, and I'll be right back. We have the first coat on there, and it is been completely dried. Now we're going to flip it the other direction. I'm going to hold it in my hand so I can watch how the paint is flowing on. It is important when working with this paint, when applying a second layer, you can actually press too hard or get your paintbrush loaded not heavy enough, and you can drag the first layer of paint. The goal is to apply a second layer without disturbing the first layer too much. So I'm going to load my paintbrush fairly heavy, and I'm going to just allow that second layer to flow onto the first. If I do a drip or a dribble, you need to brush it out immediately. The longer you let it sit there on the glass, the more likely you are to remove that first layer of paint. The reason I've taken the time to coat the accent pieces, even though they're white, and we're not going to do the bubble technique on the accent pieces, is because I want the whites to match. I've found that anywhere you do not apply the glass line paint, the white base glass will show through a different color. Smooth a little bit as we go here. Yeah, we're almost done. There, it's good enough. It's a little thicker in areas, it's a little thinner in areas, but I can tell that I have the whole piece coated, and that's what's important. Without it, the bubble technique will not work. I'll get a second. You don't have to worry about doing a second coat on the edges of the glass. Only on the top surface. There's enough that'll already have been on the sides for the black enamel will come along with later to stick. And I should add, the enamel will stick on its own. It's just sometimes you can apply it too thin and it'll be streaky. And having a base of the glass line really allows that enamel to just stick on there without too much effort. Alright, I have all of the pieces with their second coat, and I'm going to give them a dry, and we'll be back. Okay, now we're going to get back to the fun part of it, which is mixing the mixture we will use to put the bubbles on. Now if you look at this, I admit I already have some mixed in there. I don't want to throw it away. I don't have another little container like this. So I'm going to add the exact ratio of mixture to this. I'm going to mix it again and just add it in the exact way that I made this first mixture, which is 2 tablespoons of distilled water. Now if you know that I use my own tap water for a lot of mixtures and applications and whatnot with the fused glass. I've never encountered a problem with it. At your discretion, use distilled water, your tap water, you know, if there is not a problem with what you have in your house. 1, 2, and of course I got water all over. Do that every single time I mix this. Now the Rocher enamels, I'm going to add a teaspoon of enamel powder to the mixture. I will show you at the end of the video pieces that have a larger amount of the powder mixed in, so you can see how dark you can get it. But for the base mixture, 1 teaspoon of the Rocher Tracing Black Best. I have tried no other of the Rocher Blacks. There are several. I've tried a few other brands, which we'll talk about later. And then the part that makes a bubble, the part that's oh so important, that makes everything work, is the dish soap. I use Dawn Platinum, as I said before. Use whatever dish soap you have, see how it works. As long as it generates bubbles, you should be good to go. I use about 6 drops. A little more, a little less, it's not going to matter. I know that everybody tells us it's oh so important to make sure that your glass is free of soap and residue. We clean it so thoroughly to make sure we don't get devitrification. For this process, we have to have soap. I've never encountered a problem with devitrification due to having soap in the mixture left on the glass. Give it a good mix. Make sure it's stirred up really well. If you stir it really vigorously, you're going to end up with a lot of bubbles on top. And that that's okay. I mean, I'll show you how to actually work a little bit with those tiny bubbles in a minute here. You don't want to mix this right over the glass that you've spent the time base painting. It can splatter and get out of control. And now we're going to do what our parents scolded us as children not to do, which is blow bubbles into liquid. And we're going to lay them on the glass. You can try to blow them into your hand and catch them and lay them down. I prefer to kind of let them tumble over the side of the container and control them that way. You want to give it one final mix. Those enamels do settle to the bottom of the container. So if you get distracted, if you decide to, go have a cup of coffee, whatever, and you come back, you must mix them again. All right, now that we have our bubble mixture mixed up and the base coat on our glass, we're going to apply the bubbles. Make sure you have it stirred well if it is sat for any amount of time. And we're going to start, you can blow the bubbles and try to catch them in your hand and apply them, or you can, I wouldn't recommend necessarily holding it directly over the piece when you begin to blow the bubbles until you kind of see how it acts. You can end up with splattering, maybe in areas that you don't want. So we'll start blowing away it right into the cup. And when you have a good amount of bubbles, just bring them over, kind of tap to the piece and allow them to settle. I generally pop, if it's a double layer of bubbles, I get rid of that top bubble. It allows the enamel to float down the edge of the bubbles and you'll get a crisper outline. Now we're going to try to get a couple clear defined bubbles, and I'm going to do that at this point because it can sometimes be hard to do. Make sure that your mixture is adequately mixed, and the goal is going to be to blow some bubbles and to kind of capture one of them on the end, on the side of the straw, to grab it with the side of the straw. See if we can catch one here, or two, or a cluster. Well, I caught a cluster. Just going to lay them down. Sometimes blowing just slightly under the surface of the mixture will produce larger bubbles. And considering that's what I would like to catch right now is one really good one, that's what I'm going to try to do. And sometimes you catch them, but they don't quite make it to the piece. They fall off. That's the problem I'm having right now. They're falling off before I can get them over to the glass. I kind of have a bunch of little bubbles. What happens when a bunch of little bubbles form is you can gently blow on the top of the mixture and they'll dissipate. Let's see if I can get one. It's not behaving very well. I got a cluster that I caught. It's kind of like a little kid who can catch the bubbles on the bubble wand again. There's one. Since I dripped there, we'll put some there. Sometimes if you can kind of let the bubbles hang too, you can capture, you can watch the enamels flow down. There's another one. That should end up with a nice, crisp, defined edge. Those are the ones I like. That's like the jackpot. Now if you sit for a while, the enamels will separate. You'll see the top going gray. If you don't mix and you blow from holding the straw just under the surface, you will get a lighter color. If you want variation without having to do a different mix. I'm looking for that one large, beautiful one. I'm fighting for it today. It can be a lesson in patience sometimes. Or maybe even a couple, but they don't seem to be behaving. There's a little one. See, and I usually try to catch a couple on the straw. And then sometimes by the time you make it over, there's only one left, but I ended up with a bunch of little ones that time, or medium-sized ones. Oh, and now I'm going to quickly try to pop some of those. Oh, we didn't end up with any large ones as clearly defined as these, but that's okay. Now, one other thing, you can place the bubbles with the straw if you get them to stick to the straw, but also all of these little bubbles are able to be carried on the straw and placed as you want to fill in. It gives you a little bit more control. It's a technique where you just kind of have to go with the flow. You're never going to get a duplication of a piece you've created. The bubble pattern's never going to turn out the same. If, for example, you wanted to do a set of tiles for a kitchen backsplash or whatever, I would sit down and do them all at the same time. I would line them up and just continue from one to the next. The mixture can change, deviate just a little bit. How you're applying them that day can deviate. So it's easiest to just, if you need more than one that's similar, just do them all at one time. Now I'm going to leave that as it is. I really am quite fond of white areas. We're going to stamp part of this yet, so even more of it's going to end up with black. So I'm going to stop at this point with the bubbles and move on to the stamping. I use a little container with a screw-on lid so I can use it. Once I mix, I usually don't even clean the container. I just keep mixing and adding to it. There never seems to really be a shelf life. However, I do use them at least once a week, so they never sit for too long so that the container goes completely dry. The longer that this enamel mixture is exposed to air, the faster it does dry. If you sit and use it for a couple hours, you're probably going to find that you need to add a couple drops of water. Now when I say drops, I mean drops. My common mistake, I do it almost every time, is I use too much water and then I have to add in more enamel powder and more enamel powder. So we're going to start with about, I can't even guess, maybe a teaspoon or so of enamel powder. Now whenever you use enamels, you should have on a respirator, a mask. It's not good for your lungs. Make sure you protect yourself. I add in a couple drops of gum solution. It seems it helps the flow of the enamels. I used to use gum powder. I didn't enjoy it as much. This is probably about $6. You can buy it from any clay supply. My son has it to mix his glazes, and it's the same stuff. Fires very well. So we're going to use probably 2, 3, maybe 4 drops. You don't need a whole lot. That should do and be plenty. Now we need to add in the water, which I'm going to do just a tiny, tiny bit at a time if I can, and check it so I don't overdo the water. I've wasted, well, not really wasted, but I've mixed quite an amount of enamels before simply because I got a little too crazy with the water. Oh, that's definitely not enough. It's all clumpy. The goal for this is a heavy cream consistency. I've never encountered anybody who's given an actual measurement. It's kind of a learn as you go. If it acts the way you want it to act and it fires the way you wanted it to fire, then you did it right. Alright, now that looks really, really pasty. Like, that's almost like cake frosting, I would say. A little bit looser than cake frosting. You want it runnier than that. And I still have some clumps in there that haven't quite mixed in. I can see if you can. I mean, it does run off of the chopstick, but it's still too thick. I need to be able to paint this on a stamp and apply it to the glass without it drying. And if I were to paint this on, it would be too thick, pasty, and dry before I even got it applied to the stamp, or to the glass rather. So I'm going to add in just, I'm going to try for 1, maybe 2 drops. No, that might have been too much actually. We'll see if I have to add some more powder, if that's going to work. It's important to get it mixed up really well. It's not hard to mix. It blends together well. Now if you, once again, even like with the bubble mixture, with this mixture as well, if you stop, you go to do something else, you come back, it will separate. You have to give it a good mix. Make sure that it's all of an even consistency before you start to use it. Okay, I should mention now that I've dried the bubbles on this piece, it's been thoroughly dried. You don't want to touch it when the glass line is wet to begin with, or when the bubble mixture is on there wet. Simply just running your finger across it will remove all of the paint down to the base glass. Now that it's dry, you can touch it. Just not when it's wet. Don't touch it when it's wet. Now I have an enamel mixture here that is enamel powder, the Rocher enamel powder, distilled water, and a couple drops of gum solution. I don't know if the gum solution is truly necessary or not. I do know that I have a better result when I paint with it. It sticks to the glass better. Sticks to the stamp better. It fires wonderfully. So I always use a few drops of gum solution. This is simply mixed to a heavy cream consistency that is common when enamel powders are used and mixed. Nobody's ever given an exact ratio that I've found, so it's kind of a trial and error. If it doesn't fire dark enough, mix more. If it doesn't flow because it's too thick, add more water. Now we're going to use a 3D printed stamp. And first application, I rough it up with a diamond pad a little bit so the enamels don't sheet off of it the way water would on a waxed car window. And I take the enamels and I rub them in really well to make sure that they're sticking to the stamp. Because I've used stamps before, and I'll wipe it and you can literally just watch the enamel roll back off of it. That isn't going to give you a very good stamp. So I'm going to get it on there fairly heavy, and I'm going to keep moving it this way and that way in the light so I can see it shine to make sure that it indeed is nicely coated. Now when I go to apply this down onto the glass, I need to do it rather quickly. You can't put the stamp down and hold it there. What happens is the base coat of glass line will lift rather than this enamel sticking to the glass line. The glass line will lift off the glass. So I'm gonna try to move this up here because the enamel is drying rather fast on the stamp. So I'm going to keep going here until I think I've got a really good coating on it and that the stamp will be successful. It can be done. It's an attention to detail situation when it comes to working with the stamps on glass, especially when you have glass line as the base paint. Press it down, get it back off that glass. So here we go. Press down, back off. There, perfect. We're going to enter in. I've been using the computer way too much. I'm going to take a little bit of time to define and fill in this stamp. And either I'll have Wayne fast forward through this so you can see me do it really fast, or we'll omit it completely. However, I could take this time to explain the different paints that I have tested. Oh, I have a kitty coming to see me. Hey, Jasmine. Okay, you need to go, honey. Go on, go on. She wants to be on video, I guess. Anyway, I've tested a variety of paints. Glass line is a clay base. Oh, look at that. You know what? Accidents are happy accidents. That's what it wants to be. That's what we're going to let it be. So when you dribble, a dribble turns into a splatter, and that splatter is your artwork. Glass line is a clay-based paint. Underglazes for ceramics are the very same. I was raised in a ceramic shop. My parents literally had it before I was born, until my mom sold the farm after my dad passed away. Anyway, ceramics and underglazes and all of that was a way of life. So I decided, and I had tested underglazes previously on glass, and I thought, well, if glass line is similar to underglazes, why not give the underglazes a try? They do work. If you have underglazes and you do not have glass line, you can use the underglazes instead of glass line. There are some differences in the results. The underglazes fire duller. The glass line shines up. You wouldn't think much more, but it is a pretty significant difference. At the end of the video, I'll show you some examples of the different paints that I did test, and show you the result. I tested a few other enamels as well. I was frustrated when I ordered in the Rocher enamels. The company that I ordered them from, their shipping was quite high. And as a seller and a buyer on the internet for many years, I'm sensitive to shipping, we'll just put it that way. So I did try some other brands. I'm sure there is another supplier for Rocher out there that will have better shipping than what I paid to get them in. And I just need to take the time to find them. But I did stock up when I placed the order. I thought, well, if I have to pay that for shipping, I'll get a really big jar. And that's what I did. Anyway, I tested Duncan Concepts underglaze, which had a really fun, unique property that I'll show you in the end result. I tested Amco Velvet underglaze, which, as you would think from its name, on ceramics it does have a velvet texture. It is very dull, and it does hold a texture quite well. However, if you get too heavy-handed with it, it can pull a little bit. Now, I tend to use the stamps as just a guideline, switching topics here a little bit, and I like to kind of put in my own detail. That way each one is going to turn out different. I don't have to depend solely on that stamp turning out exactly as I think it will. And I can have my son make whatever I want if it's something that I don't want to really take the time to paint. The stamp enables me to kind of rough it in and go from there. It saves me a bit of time. There, I think that's just about where I'd like it to be. A little grungy. It'll fire well. Oh, maybe a little bit more here. See if we can keep some highlights within that feather so it's not solid black. And see if the stamp had turned out 100% how it was supposed to, or how you'd expect it to. This entire feather would have been black. I wouldn't have been able to save any of these light areas that give it interest. I like the variation in the edges, to and fro. I have to be careful here. I can find myself getting lost in the painting and just sit and fiddle and fiddle and fiddle. There, I think that's good enough. Now it's time to move on to the little accent pieces. I prefer them, I'm going to set that to the side, and it'll probably be dry by the time we come back to it. I prefer them to be black on the edges. So I take that same enamel mixture that I used for the stamp, and I'm going to paint it on the edge of all of these pieces. Now that glass line that we put on there previously makes me able to go over the edges really fast. I mean, it just sticks. It's not, you're not going to see brush strokes. It's going to be there. It's going to be black. It's going to fire just fine. I don't have to work at it. So one simple quick coat in the beginning makes this go really fast. Part of the reason I deviated from the original design of the Raven was, you know, we spend, the purpose of this is to teach you that gorgeous bubble technique. We'll cover half of it up with the accent pieces if we stick to that design. And I like the accent pieces. I like the interest it adds. I didn't really want to remove that aspect of it for the sole purpose of the tutorial. So we have smaller accent pieces, less of them. They don't fill up the entire side. Now that I've got the edges coated, I really shouldn't touch them when they're wet because it will pull off just like the main piece we worked on. I'm just going to roughly paint these and weather them up a little bit. Now the reason I've chosen to put glass line white on these accent pieces is because if you don't, the white base glass fires a different color than the white paint, and it really does show. It really does make a difference. Those little details are important. You wouldn't, you know, people, you wouldn't think that blacks don't match or whites don't, but they definitely do. There are different shades of white, there are different shades of black. And if you want a cohesive piece, it takes just a second to get that base coat on there. A little bit extra, oh, more than a second, but just not a whole lot of time in the grand scheme of things. There, those are done. They're weathered, have a weathered appearance to them, which is what I wanted. We'll set those aside very carefully. You really should dry these before moving them, just to not mess up your hard work. See, yep, and I'm going to show you exactly what happened because I was impatient. I don't know if it'll show up on the camera or not, but this right here, because I touched it, it chipped off the glass line, the enamel, all of it, down to the base glass. So I needed to touch that up again. And let's see if I can move this one. You know, once they're dry, you can handle them without fear. Alright, now we'll let those dry for a minute, and while we do, I'll teach you how to make some really fast frit. If you have coarse and medium frit black, you can grab that now, and you don't have to worry about this step. But if you don't, get a towel, get some protective eyewear on. Personally, I've been to the ER twice with glass in my eye. It's not a fun experience. You don't want to do it. They don't remove it for free either. So, Grozer, we usually use it this direction to break glass once we've scored it. Today we're going to flip it upside down and we're going to use it to crush the glass into frit. I put it in the towel. I'm going to grab a piece of paper here and put underneath it to collect the frit as well. I do it in the towel so it doesn't go everywhere. It reduces the chance of it getting in my eyes. It kind of controls it a little bit. So holding the Grozer like this, we're just going to grab onto the edge and we're going to crush it. Kind of hold the towel around it and we're going to crush it within the towel. I'm sure you can't see what I'm doing because I can't even see what I'm doing because the towel's in the way. But that's the result. You get variation in frit, everything from powder to coarse. It'll give you a nice variation on the piece quickly without spending any extra money. You can use the scrap you have. I want to make sure I make enough so I don't have to stop and make more. And I have enough to cover the areas that I'd like to. Probably going a little bit overboard, but that's alright. Better too much than not enough. Alright, there we go. Shake off the towel, set that to the side, and there is our frit. I'm going to turn this actually to face you this time. Now, before we move on, we need to clean off the back of the glass. If we were to put it in the kiln this way, let's see, oh, well, yep, there's some paint there. If we were to put it in the kiln this way, everywhere that there's paint, that is going to pull your kiln wash off your shelf, or your fire paper is going to stick to it, your thin fire. I don't know about papyrus, and I'm assuming it'll work the same way. But it's best to clean that paint off the back. So I just use a little bit of Windex on one of my blue towels and flip it over. You can touch the paint on the front without worrying about it chipping when it's dry. Just be gentle. I'm just going to go along and I'm going to wipe that paint off the back. Now, if you want the sides to be as they are, you can assemble. You need to look and decide if you like how they appear. Personally, I'd rather that they be black, like the sides of the accent pieces I created. So I'm going to go back I'm going to grab my enamel again, mixture in the smallest container that I've mixed for the stamp and for the paintbrush. And I'm going to paint the edges. And since I've already cleaned the back, I'm going to be really careful not to get it on the back. Otherwise, if you do, just let it dry and then wipe it off again. It's not a big deal. What it comes down to is I should have looked at the side of my glass before I cleaned off the back, and I didn't. And this will enable us to do a piece that is more similar to the Raven, the original piece that I showed. Wayne? And now we have another little fur ball going to come through here. Wayne's going to grab her for me, so we don't have a whole parade starting. Okay, just about done here. We'll see how good I did. Oh, no, I got paint on the back. So, I'll deal with that in a little while. I'm going to weather the sides of this piece similar to what I did with the accent pieces, so everything matches, just like that original Raven. Go around the edges, pull it in a little bit. Don't have to be too neat. Pull it in, let it bounce off the texture a little bit. We're going to come back with frit and cover some of these dark areas. Anyway, ooh, there we go. I don't want to disturb those beautiful bubbles too much. Work to get those a little bit, so going to carefully do just little bits and vary it so it doesn't look like I just purposely avoided that, which I did. But the viewer at the end doesn't need to know. The person who purchases this doesn't need to know. I can make it look kind of even to the eye. Make it seem like it's natural, even though I purposely avoided that area because I wanted to leave that pretty and clear. I know, you do all this hard work and then you cover it up with some brush strokes, but it's kind of worth it to give every element a similar look and feel, make it feel like it belongs together. In the end, I think you can appreciate the entire piece as a whole, even though some of the prettiest elements maybe get covered up a little bit. I don't want a stark contrast there, so I'm going to work to give a medium tone. Maybe a long little stripe here and there. You know, it's art. You just kind of have to let it be what it wants to be, do what feels right at the time. There. Alright. We'll lay on those accent pieces. Dry, dry, dry. I'm going to place my little accent pieces. I don't want to cover up too much of the bubbles, so I'm going to kind of put them on there a little strategically. You don't want to slide the accent pieces across the glass too roughly. You will scrape all of that hard work that you've done, and it could show. So be gentle. You can move the pieces and adjust them. Just be gentle when you do so. Now we're just going to lay in some frit, give a little bit of a texture. I like to lay some of the frit where there's an obvious brush stroke black area. Having the texture, even though it is black, helps break it up. It isn't as abrupt to the eye. It gives it a nice transition. You're kind of fooling the eye in a way. And I do use all sizes of the frit. It gives a nice variance. I don't know if you have the calluses and whatnot built up on your fingers yet, how long you've used glass for. If you don't have them, you might want to use a little spoon or something to put the frit on there rather than your fingers. I generally do just pick it up with my fingers and place it on. There, just about there. I don't want to neglect some areas up top though. I don't want to seem like I've just done a border. We want to give it a little looser of a feel. Likewise, I don't want to cover up some of those beautiful bubbles either. Some of the ones that turned out so lovely. A little bit of the finer pieces of frit. And now, before I fire, I generally throw on some black dichro frit. I like the sparkle. I started using it for some reason years ago on every piece that I make, and I don't think I've done one since that doesn't have it on it. Could be just that I like, you know, the appearance of art that's just a little bit grungy, a little imperfect. Okay, now one final thing. Before I fire this, I'm going to run my finger along the edge. I found even with a contour fuse, sometimes if there's a piece of frit just teetering right on the edge, it can still, ouch, there we go, got one in the finger. It can needle point out, and this is not a piece that I want to cold work because of all the paint work that has been done on the edges. I want it to fire and be done. One firing, done. So I'm going to take this now and, well, maybe a little bit more frit here because it didn't have any, and looking there, it doesn't necessarily look right to me that it didn't have a little bit. I mean, the inside here was totally bare. So a little bit more. I'm going to fire this piece, and you will actually see it at the end of the video, this exact one. Okay, we're going to take a few minutes and go through some pieces, explain exactly which paints were used, and kind of take a look at how everything turned out. This was the piece that the tutorial was completed on. Used glass line white and ruche black. This was the piece that was not seen in the tutorial. I had filmed previously and decided that I didn't want to cover up all of the bubble technique with the accent pieces. So I filmed again. But this piece actually had a beautiful medium-sized bubble. So it is something that can be achieved. You just have to be patient to get it to work out. But like I said, it can be done, and it is beautiful. Worth the time and effort by far. This is the original Raven piece, also done, all three of the pieces I've shown you so far were done with glassline white and ruche black. This was the original piece I had done before I filmed the tutorial. This one was also done with glassline white and ruche black enamel, but in this instance, all in the same firing, I put a layer of clear powder frit on there. I wanted to see what the difference would be, how shiny it would become. Now, when you look at it, it does. It has the high shine that fused glass does. Perhaps not quite as even of a finish as a full fused piece, but it still has all of the shine. Now, this piece was fired to the same temperature as the schedule. Example schedule I'll give you. However, it did have a 3 or 4 minutes additional hold added on to get that powder to fire to a shine. This next piece is glassline white and ruche black once again. However, this is a bit of an example on how if you don't base coat the accent pieces white, they do not quite match. You can tell that there are two different whites there. So once again, if that matters, make sure you coat your base piece, base coat your accent pieces. There we go. Now in this piece I used a stencil. I just laid the stencil down. I took my brush, dipped it in the brush enamel mixture, and tapped it into place. Now when I lifted the stencil, some of it did lift, the base paint lifted with the stencil, and you can see it if you look really close. You can see that base white peeking through. So if you choose to use a stencil, it is a really good idea to hold your glass this way and that way, and wherever the paint has lifted or you've missed, it will shine because the enamels in the glass line are dull pre-fire. This is another example of the same paints, glassline white, ruche black enamel. This piece, once again, has stenciled letters, a stamped section, and on this one I set down my coffee cup and brushed around it and got a little coffee cup stain. So you don't necessarily have to use stamps. You can just be creative. Normal, everyday household objects can take a place in your art. Now we'll get on to the testing of some other paints. This piece was done with glassline white and Fuse Master enamels. Now it did work. However, if you look really close, those bubbles are not clearly defined on the edges as well as they are with the ruche enamels. They got a little bit muddy. Overall, if you have the Fuse Master enamels and you don't want to wait or you don't want to order in the ruche, they do work. They just have a muddier result. I would perhaps mix them a little thinner in the bubble mixture, a little less, maybe 3/4 of a teaspoon of the Fuse Master enamel, just so you can have a lighter bubble result to start with and then build off of it. Another thing to note is that the black is not as black. The Fuse Master does not fire as black when held up against the ruche. The Fuse Master also produced dull areas where it was really heavy. It didn't shine up like it should have. I'm not sure if maybe that is a top temperature issue where it should have been fired a little bit hotter, or if that is a behavior of Fuse Master. I've not used it enough to determine that. Now this one is And I actually didn't think that it was going to turn out at all. That's why I never even bothered to cut the piece of glass square. So I was pleasantly surprised. It is white glass line. And then I used black glass line. I took and diluted the black glass line paint and added soap to it and created a bubble mixture, and it does indeed work. It doesn't get the clear definition around the bubbles. It's not as black. Once again, same issue. The glass line black is more of a charcoal black, whereas the Ruche black enamel is really definitely a jet black. Also, another thing to note is even where I stamped it and I painted over the top of it with a brush, those lines are not truly opaque and black using the glass line paint. This piece has ceramic underglazes, Amco white underglaze on it. Very dull, no shine whatsoever. The enamels did shine up a little bit. As you can see as I tilt it back and forth in the light, the enamels did shine up on the top of this one. I put them on very heavy when I painted to get that little bit of shine there. Underglazes do work. If you have them, you want to play around, give them a go, see how it turns out. This one is an example of a very heavy coat of the white base paint. Right here, you will see that it actually was so thick it pulled. Now I laid down a texture stencil, and I think I probably have 5 or so really good coats of, I believe this one was underglaze, but I know that glass line can react the same way. So yeah, if you put it on really, really thick, you can expect some cracking and pulling and exposing that white color of the glass underneath. This is an example of a very heavy-handed mixture of the enamels in the bubble mix. I used, the normal ratio is 2 tablespoons of water and 1 teaspoon of enamels. This was 1.5 teaspoons of enamel. And you can see it turns out it's not so dark that you can't see the bubbles, but it definitely is dark overall. This one is regular white underglaze, Amco. I do not believe it was a velvet underglaze with the Ruche enamels. Everything is dull. The white is dull. The enamels are dull. Nothing has a shine to it. Now when I use Duncan Concepts underglazes, you'll notice that, well, first of all, it wasn't white. I didn't have white. However, I had a purple and a teal. Now, the underglaze itself is dull. With even a light application of enamel, that enamel takes on quite a lovely shine. So this was something I was a little bit surprised by, but it's quite beautiful. I do plan on ordering in some more of the Concept underglazes to play with it a bit more in perhaps white or a few more lighter colors, simply because it almost looks as though it has depth and a texture, but it is smooth indeed. Well, I think that sums it up. If there's anything else to be added in, I will make sure that Wayne does it in the video editing. Thank you so much.